up here in just a few moments. Right now, the English String Symphony, or rather, English String Orchestra perform.
Welcome, everybody. Today's June 10th, 2013. It is 4 p.m. I'd like to go ahead and call to order and do our roll call for our City Commission meeting today.
Mayor Shirley.
Here.
Commissioner Blanchard.
Here.
Commissioner Crawford.
Here.
Commissioner Hardy.
Here.
Commissioner Householder.
Here.
Okay. All those that are able, if we could stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Looks like we do not have any awards or proclamations today. We'd go on to citizen forums. This is an opportunity for anyone to come forward and speak regarding to an item that is not on our agenda. If anyone would like to come up and talk about anything.
Bueller.
Well, I'm Tracy Sin, 340.5 South Connecticut. I just wanted to let Brad Anderson know how much I appreciate the River Festival going on, and it was really, really fun, and I'm looking forward to next year. Thank you.
Thank
City
you.
Commissioner Mann.
Thank you.
Okay, we have no public hearings or items scheduled for a certain time. Move on to the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of June 3rd, 2013. Item 6.2, authorize the city manager to authorize the purchase of a used vehicle for the fire department in amount not to exceed $28,000.
Is there anything a commissioner would like to remove from the agenda or amend?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as is. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Carries 5-0. On to development business. Mr.
Items-
Andrew, oh, sorry.
Item 7.1, application number Z13-3, requesting a change in zoning district classification from C1 to C2 and R2 to allow beauty salons and other neighborhood businesses and construction of a single-family attached dwelling on Lot 27 on Hazel Court. Sub-item 7.1A, first reading ordinance number 1010702.
Mr. Andrew. I get ahead of myself sometimes.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. This is an application for a zoning change. It's a little unusual because it's been submitted to you by multiple applicants and multiple owners. And just by way of background, we have Jeff Mays here representing the applicants, and he can probably better explain some of the logistics involved than I can. But the original origin of this was, as you may or may not be aware, there were plans for purchasing property, clearing the corner of Ohio and Crawford, the northeast corner, and constructing a CVS pharmacy on that corner. And as part of that, the Continental Hair Salon in that location would be needing to relocate. And they were looking at the property at the very northeast or northwest corner of Greeley and Ohio, which is right here, which is the Jeff Wells American Family Insurance Agency. That property is zoned C1, and at present, barber and beauty shops are not permitted in that zoning district. And so, as we discussed that, staff expressed a desire to look at what the appropriate zoning was for that entire area. So the application, instead of being for an isolated individual lot, basically started at the location here and encompasses that whole area that you see shaded there, including one lot that fronts on the Hazel Court location. And so the application that is presented to you today is filed by multiple owners who would like to reclassify this property, this property, this property, this property, and this property from C1 to C2. And then in visiting with the Bixby's, this is presently zoned for commercial use, but has frontage only on Hazel Court, and they are interested in constructing a duplex. So the request would be to upzone from C1 to C2 on these lots, and to go to downzone from C1 to R2 on that lot. We've highlighted for you the differences between C1 and C2 are kind of summarized on page 2 of your report. Both of them are, C1 and C2 are considered to be low-intensity commercial districts. The primary difference is that just about the only permitted use of right in the C1 district is business and professional offices, whereas C2 maintains the smaller scale but allows for service businesses to locate as well. An example of another C2 zone property would be the property that is across from the Dillons on the east side of South Ohio, where you have Papa John's and a chiropractor's office. That is another example of C2 type development. So as this was looked at, it's the C3 zoning is across the street for the hardware store and the funeral home and the bank, but these lots on the north side are much smaller and would not support that type of more intense retail development. So C2 was the district that was applied for, and all of those lots are suitable for some form of C2 development or redevelopment. As you can see, this particular property here, which is owned by Ben and Lavelle Frick, has the most redevelopment potential in terms of future utilization. And so, John, if you could go back to the vicinity map for zoning. This just gives you the pattern in the area. You can see that this is predominantly single-family residential east of Ohio. This is R2 because almost all of this is rental housing and multifamily of some form. The Fairgrounds and Bicentennial Center complex is zoned C3 at present, and then these sites and going down South Ohio were zoned C3. So staff and the Planning Commission were of the belief that the C2 zoning would still serve as a buffer or step down in intensity between the zoning south of Greeley and the residences on Hazel Court. There shouldn't be any change in terms of water, sanitary sewer, fire protection. There's no physical changes to the property proposed at this time. And what makes this somewhat unique is that we have C1 property on a major arterial street, being Ohio Street, and C1 is generally found more commonly on less traveled streets and intermixed with some residential. So there's a little bit of a mismatch here between the arterial street frontage and the C1 zoning. When we looked at the comprehensive plan, this is a transition area between commercial areas to the south and urban residential moving north along the west side of Ohio. But no matter which way you look at it, both of those designations support small scale, or what it refers to as appropriately scaled business and service uses. And so this corner location fits that criteria under either land use designation. The Planning Commission looked at this at the C2 request and looked at the number of owners participating in the request, and on page 6 of your report they gave 5 reasons in support of their recommendation to go from C1 to C2, and this is a somewhat isolated C1 district. It's not really associated with any other office park area. It has frontage on a heavily traveled street in Ohio. It's adjacent to a signalized intersection, except for this lot here, which everyone felt was more conducive to residential zoning and use. The C2 zoning would still provide a buffer, and the C2 development would be better in scale with the nearby residential. And so they recommended that this property be rezoned to C2. What we did not wish to have happen was to have all of this rezoned to C2 and then come back and find that there might be challenges or parking challenges or other challenges related to actual use of that site as a beauty salon. So as a follow-up item, their recommendation from the Planning Commission was to look at the very corner lot here as a planned C2 and look at the specific plan for that usage. And there was a parking analysis done by staff. There was a plan presented by Continental Hair Salon's architect, which you see here. In your material that you have, we have a breakdown for each of the sites there. When we went out and looked at this, one of the things that was somewhat deceptive was this is the property line right here. There's a paved area here. There were 3 vehicles associated with the Jeff Wells agency that were parked on the Frick's property via a handshake agreement, which would not necessarily extend to the beauty salon. So we had to look at that independently, and essentially these spaces here exist, these spaces here exist, these 2 could be added, and altogether that would create 11 off-street parking spaces. So as a follow-up action, the Planning Commission also voted to recommend approval of that plan with a modification to the required number of parking spaces from 12 to 11 and an exception to the requirement for landscape buffer along Greeley. If you could go back to that plan, John, the site plan. So essentially the Planning Commission recommended approval of this plan and that be incorporated as part of the action rezoning the property. And this is the property line right here. At some point there would be an opportunity to put a sidewalk there in the public right-of-way, but there's no space here to get any kind of buffer between those parking spaces and Greeley Avenue. So that was identified, and the Planning Commission, you'll also find on page 6 their findings associated with the parking and the landscaping. So the ordinance that you have attached would rezone majority of the lots from C1 to C2, would rezone the property on Hazel Court to R2 right here, and would create a planned C2 designation for that site, which would allow a beauty salon in accordance with the site plan that is attached to your packet. So if you are in concurrence with that recommendation, the attached ordinance should be approved on first reading. If you disagree with any aspect of that recommendation or finding, you could either return this item back to the Planning Commission for reconsideration and identify what aspects you disagree with, or you could vote to deny this request if you think the C2 zoning is not compatible with the zoning and uses of nearby property. So that is my best explanation. Again, we have Dr. Fredrickson, the eye doctors, and property owned by Dr. Brungart, property owned by Jeff Wells, property owned by Barry Martin, which is the State Farm agency, and property owned by Ben and Lavelle Frick, as well as David and Nancy Bixby, are all part of this request.
I do have one question. I understand the C1, C2, and the residentials. Isn't the Frick's property, is it part of it zoned for agricultural? Because I do know they grow wheat there. So do we need to change wording on some of that?
It is not a function of zoning. The county appraiser does not always look at zoning. He looks at actual use of property. So you could have property, say on the Central Mall property that is zoned commercial, but they might be growing wheat or they've grown soybeans there before. The county appraiser will look at that, and if the owner proves that they have a viable agricultural crop, then the county appraiser will classify it as agricultural for property tax purposes, but it doesn't have anything to do with the actual zoning.
Okay, I was wondering about that. Thank you. Any other questions for staff?
Yeah, Mr. Andrew, on this, the main trigger for this was the corner lot, correct?
The primary driving force for this was a corner lot, but planning staff said we had a preference for if C2 was appropriate for the corner, then we needed to look at the entire C1 zoned area and see if the whole thing was suitable for C2, and all of the owners expressed interest in joining the application.
Okay, yeah, because I think it's in the packet, I think that's where I read it, or it was at the Planning Commission meeting, one of the two, but the existing lot on the corner conforms with the landscaping standards and so on that are currently
Yes.
in effect, and the other ones, I believe, are
We're
kind of
all-
grandfathered in.
We're all developed prior.
Right.
Yeah.
Does this zone change trigger those properties needing to come into conformance, or would it be triggered by a building
That would be
permit?
triggered by a building permit.
Okay.
So if, for instance, the building that is directly to the east, or excuse me, the west of the corner lot that is owned by the Fricks, if that were removed and that site were redeveloped, then landscaping along Greeley as part of any redevelopment would occur there. If somebody did a major addition or removed and rebuilt Dr. Brungart's office, then as part of that redevelopment, they would have to incorporate front yard landscaping. But the zoning change itself does not trigger that, since they were developed in the 60s and early 70s, when landscaping was not required.
Is the C2 more or less restrictive on landscape, or about the same?
It is exactly the same.
Exactly the same. That's the one area I have a little discomfort with, is the removal of the tree, although I have to say with the rest of the lots there, basically being all parking lots, it's kind of a hard argument to make there, but I'm never in favor of us taking our new buildings that we have landscape requirements for and then just saying, nah, don't worry about it, we'll get rid of it.
There's some question about whether that could actually be transplanted, but it will have to be replaced, not
Somewhere.
just removed. But obviously, if you have a tree that's at good a shape and that maturity, you want to replace it with something similar.
yeah.
But the architect and the prospective purchaser both understand that if that tree is removed, it has to be replaced or relocated, and we will work with them either way, but it will be replaced in some fashion.
Okay.
I'm assuming that the traffic, or the parking configuration on that south side of the building conforms with our standard. I mean, it's an odd,
The newer wood, this recessed parking here is not something that, where you're backing directly into the street, is not something that would presently be allowed, because we don't allow for backing and maneuvering of spaces directly into the street. These spaces are designed in a way where you can back out and head out, but these two here are already there, and so the opening is already there, and they were taking advantage of it.
so as long as nobody's parking on the other side of that property line, they're okay.
Yes. If you drive or walk out there, there's paving all through here, and you have to look carefully to know where the line is. But when we went out to take our pictures and stuff, this paving here is actually on the Fricks property, although some of Mr. Wells' vehicles were parked there. So that was part of our challenge, was to figure out exactly how many spaces went with Mr. Wells' property.
And is there any general, and this is probably more of a catch-all question, is there generally any policy that you look at for downzoning something from what would be a C2 to the R2 that might impact any potential future redevelopment of that entire?
Well, what we determined was, and I don't, John, if you have a photograph of Dr. Fredrickson's office, which is the farthest north. The initial zoning, this is looking from Ohio, and there's a rental property here, and there's parking in back. The initial zoning was just on the Ohio frontage. Then in 1985, the zoning was changed all the way back to the, maybe if you could go to the aerial photo, John. So the initial zoning was just right here on Ohio, and then these lots, this is part of lot 26, which is odd shape, and this lot were rezoned to C1 to allow for rear parking, except nothing ever happened here, and Dr. Drevitz, who owned it, sold it to the Bixbys, and the Bixbys, although they purchased it, said they didn't know that it was zoned C1, so I told them if they had no interest in commercial development, then this would be their opportunity to request that it be zoned for duplex construction, which would be consistent with everything else that's here on Hazel Court. So that is their request as owners to be zoned R2.
I just, looking at that down the road, it just seems to me that that would be more advantageous to have that kind of as a contiguous R2, or I'm sorry, C2. I mean, the property lines obviously are kind of strange in there, which I think kind of adds to the confusion. But you have a driveway, right?
This area here is all still grass, and if somebody wanted to go in here and put additional parking, they could.
Right. I mean, we're talking about
this piece right here.
Yeah, we're talking about parking being a consideration, and albeit for the corner. But yeah, with the driveway coming off of Hazel for that parking lot there on the furthest north commercial property, I think that's the eye doctor. Is that the eye doctor's one, or is
This
that?
is the foot doctor.
Okay.
This is the eye doctor.
Yeah. That's the only thing I have any. I mean, it's not a deal killer
I
for me,
think
but
we would be in agreement with you if it was still part of the ownership of these doctors, but the Dr. Drevitz actually sold it off to Mr. Bixby to build a duplex, and Mr. Bixby said he did not know that it was zoned C1 and thought this was an opportunity to get it zoned for duplex.
What is the zoning of the building that's on Hazel Court that is not part of this? Do you know?
Right here?
No, farther down west.
All this?
Right there, yeah.
This is all R2.
Is that all R2?
Everything here is R2.
Okay,
And
so it would
all
not
of
be
these are either
inconsistent.
duplexes or more.
So it would not be inconsistent with what's already there.
No, it's R2 right here, and it's R2 across the street.
Right.
That is what he foresaw, and so it would just be an extension of this R2 to here.
Mm-hmm.
And it was R2 before 1985 when it was zoned to C1.
Any other questions for staff?
Mayor, may I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Please? Dean, given that most of those structures between Hazel Court and the River Channel are duplexes, I'm assuming that those are investor-owned rental properties, most of them, if not all of them?
Yes, there's two of them that are owned by the Salina Housing Authority that are fairly recent construction. This here and the one next to it were constructed in the 1990s by the Housing Authority.
Okay. Commissioners, if you look at the zoning map, Dean went over it, but the across the river, all that is C3. South across Greeley, it's all C3. Obviously, you have a wide roadway with Ohio Street on the east, and on the north it gets cut off at Midway. You really have basically a triangle that's cut off from other neighborhoods. And one of the things that is something not so much to think about maybe today, but in the long term, is whether that should be C3 at some point, which if there's a scale demand for a community, there may not be, but at some point, that's all those properties would be pretty complementary redevelopment properties with
Right.
an Ohio
Oh, yeah.
frontage, Greeley access, and across the river from Bicentennial Center activities. Again, not something to worry too much about today, but something that you might want to consider, because the city can initiate rezonings if you should choose, and if you believe that that sends a message that says we'd like to see that redeveloped at some point in time.
I appreciate that comment, because I think that's the heartburn that I have with rezoning that to an R2, is that I see that encouraging somebody to go in there and build a brand-new duplex, where something that I think, if you look long-term and if you look at the river master plan and the C3 to the south, I think that you almost want to encourage, and I like it being rezoned to the C2 because I think it's a step in that direction to encouraging the redevelopment of that area, and maybe even a mixed-use type commercial, maybe something that might be more river project friendly, so to speak. But and so that's why I have a little bit of a heartburn with rezoning that to R2, because I think it kind of almost sends a message that, yeah, just go ahead and let's encourage residential use there, when I think that probably long term it does kind of tend to want to evolve into more of a commercial, especially with all the rental properties that are located on the street.
If you envision that at some point Midway becomes the front door to the Bicentennial Center and Fairgrounds, then probably changing this front door from Greeley to Midway is something that's likely to occur. I guess what I could suggest in regards to the Bixby property, and that would be your choice, if that were not included in your action, it would simply stay C1. What I explained to Mr. Bixby was the way it's currently zoned, you could come in and apply for a conditional use permit, which would have to have a public hearing and approval to build a duplex, whereas if he were zoned R2, he could simply apply for a building permit. So given those options, he said, well, I'd like to join in and be R2, but if you pulled that out and left it alone, then he would have to make an application to actually construct the duplex, which that would at least allow the question to be called at that point in time. So that is a variation of what you have in front of you. You could pull lot 27 out.
Okay.
I'm not real comfortable with the wording that Commissioner Blanchard used with river project and river redevelopment, because that's nowhere in the blue sheets with that wording. It's just basically rezoning and some development over there that has nothing to do with something 50 years down the road. So I don't want to, use that term.
Well, what we reported to
anything to
you
do with this.
is what is in today in the comprehensive plan. This is commercial to the intersection, and then up into this area is shown as an urban residential, which is kind of can be a higher density residential with some commercial mixed in.
Right.
But there's been no, I think what the city manager was mentioning, you would probably have something in front of you as a first step to amend the comprehensive plan first as to what the vision was for this area, and that would be step one, and then step two would be whatever zoning action that might take place.
Oh, I can see where Commissioner Blanchard is going with it, and like we said in our comprehensive plan, but it gets into that one area a little bit of we're not the developer, and I mean, I definitely appreciate what he's saying, that we don't want to encourage this regrowth, that there's probably a higher and better use, but with that delicate balance of we can't necessarily hold hostage one piece of property over an anticipated development.
Right.
I mean, it is
Well,
kind of a moral. I definitely follow where he's saying we have a comprehensive plan that calls for this to be something different. And now we're again kind of going against that sort of.
Right. Well, if you allow me
Yeah.
to clarify on that, and my comments were primarily based towards, and I wasn't part of the commission when it was voted on to make the river master plan a guiding policy tool for some of these areas. But I might just mention that regardless if you do a river project or not, I think you're looking at the opportunity there as a sort of a donut hole of residential development, and being so close to the C3, I think when we look at true neighborhood commercial, we're looking at an opportunity there too. Eventually down the road, I think C1 and C2 work now because of the parcel sizes, but I think that if you have a any developer with any sophistication whatsoever is going to want to bring the traffic off of Greeley or off of Ohio further to the north and not have so many curb cuts on Ohio and be able to put together those parcels
Aggregate.
for one cohesive development. I think the opportunity exists there if the decisions we make now are kind of consistent with that vision.
Would it make more sense to have the conditional use permit then?
I think since I would say my preference would be it's C1 now, everything else wants to be C2. Let's don't downzone it to something that might get in the way of,
Aggregation later.
not necessarily, get in the way isn't a good, but that kind of encourages something in a different direction than I think probably you want your land use policy to do.
Any comments from the public?
So if you had any specifics about the logistics of who's moving where or any of that, Mr. Mays would be your person to help you with that.
I was just trying to be careful with certain wording, and especially with media here, I don't want them misunderstanding where this might be going or misquoting.
They wouldn't do that.
Mayor and Commissioners, Jeff Mace, Compro Realty, 157 South 7th. A couple items. First, I'll offer to stand for any other questions. Much of what you've discussed were things that we talked about internally. First note I made while listening to your comments was relative to the tree. It's everyone's desire to replant that tree because of its maturity and whatnot. We're just not sure if we're going to be able to because of its maturity. So, but a tree will remain one way or the other, but we'd rather not plant something new, but rather use that. Commissioner Blanchard's comments and some of what you're talking about is exactly the same road I went. I mean, it looks to me like an excellent opportunity in the future, many years down the road, to do so. I found some peace of mind in looking at the C2 zoning, and it is neighborhood shopping district. It would allow for that if we went in later and took it all C2. For the purposes of today, we felt like the C1 to C2 battle was maybe more appropriate than jumping all the way to C3 and all the additional allowed uses when lot size isn't appropriate today. But I mean, even going in and redeveloping it in a C2 would allow for a lot of services that would be appropriate in this area if you went in and scraped it all. So we beat that around too and had a lot of the same comments. But I found peace with the C2 and saying that it could still be redeveloped at a C2 and be viable.
Right, and I was comfortable with up to that point too.
So I don't know, are there any specific questions y'all have of me on behalf of the applicants?
Yeah, I agree with you. I see the C2 as identifying what's needed now and specifically to make that corner work for what it needs to do. And then perhaps if something happens down the road and C3 comes up and all the other landowners are able to participate, then that would be cross that then. But I agree with you that
We were concerned that maybe we were taking on a little too much going all the way from C1 to C3 in today's environment with lot sizes being what they are.
Right.
If someone comes in and can accumulate it and make it contingent upon rezoning, then you've got a site plan. We've got the opportunity to look at it for what it will be when that day gets here.
Right.
That's why we were agreeable to the C2 requests.
Right, makes sense. Any other questions for Mr. Mays?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
With no other questions for staff or for Mr. Mays, does anyone else like to, I know Mr. Brungart's out here. Do you have any comments about with your properties involved?
Nothing to add, Madam Mayor.
Okay, anyone else with their property involved that would like to approach?
Or not involved.
Okay, or not,
Yeah,
or not
we're
involved.
Yeah. Well, limit.
Careful with the wording again.
Just for context, the thought about a C3, my perspective, is future.
Yeah.
But I do believe, though, and we're talking future, we're not talking about today, just something that I think you should think about into the long-term future, is that if you're looking at wanting that property, will you acquire parcels that you know you're going to have to get a rezoning, or will you be more apt to acquire them if it's already zoned properly? Now, I don't think that should affect your decision on the C2 issue today, so I'm not suggesting you even look at a C3 today. What I am suggesting, though, is in a year, 2 years, 5 years, sometime in the future, we should probably start looking at this and ask ourselves if, in fact, there's a point in time which you want to take a look at the whole triangle, but not necessarily today.
Right.
Yeah.
That may even be in the form of an overlay or some other instrument that we can look at, so.
Yeah, it sure seems an underutilized area, that's for sure.
Has been. A couple eyesores too over there, so. Seeing what-
Not your office, of course.
No,
Yeah.
not yours. You keep yours up very well, thank you, we appreciate that. Seeing no other questions or comments, I would entertain a motion.
I move we approve ordinance number 13-10702 and concur with the recommendation of the Planning Commission on rezoning this site to C2, R2, and planned C2 on first reading.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second on ordinance number 13-10702. All in favor of that motion?
Hang on, can we discuss this a second?
Sure. Let's just,
Because I'm not sure, I don't have an amendment that I'd like to propose. And the amendment I'd like to propose is that we remove lot
Do we
20.
do that, can we do that after a motion and a second, Greg? Yes. Okay, just making sure, okay. Okay. Okay.
So just for, if you guys want a discussion on this, I'll make a motion that we amend the motion to exclude lot 27.
I'll second that motion.
Leave it C1, conditional use.
Correct.
Yeah, that would be leaving lot 27 as C1. If they choose to come in for a duplex on that property, they can go through the conditional use process. So it's really not changing that anything, but it's not holding the rest of it up for moving forward.
Mr. Andrew, I might ask, is there any additional burden or cost to the landowner with this process? I mean, short of coming in for the conditional use and the public meeting, I mean, it could be seen as the...
They would be required to file an application and pay an application fee, which would be in the neighborhood of $260 for a conditional use permit. The flip side of that is that this application was sponsored by Mr. Wells and Mr. Mays, and the Bixby's did not pay any fee for this application. They were free riders on this request. So in terms of, it's not any different than what it is today. Today, that's what the Bixby's would have to do if they wanted to build a duplex. It would just maintain the status quo.
Okay.
So what would be the reason we want to do that?
Well,
I mean, why put them to that expense if we're going to do it anyway?
because
I don't,
I think the main reason is that right now, we'd be downzoning that to R2. To keep this as C1, I think encourages that type of use and also doesn't send a mixed message to someone like, for instance, go in and build a brand new duplex, and then when everybody else wants to redevelop around you, there's a new duplex right in the middle of the development, which in most cases is a discouragement toward redevelopment of the entire parcel. So I think it's, I think that it's probably consistent with solid land use policy to maybe try to, instead of downzoning that to R2, to keep it
Keep it consistent.
keep it commercial, right?
So would I need to make a amended
Well, we have a
motion,
motion and
or-
a second.
Yeah,
Since
the-
we had a motion and a second,
Right, since you have a motion to
amendment.
amend and a second to that motion, and I'm not sure whether you have the possibility for more discussion or not, but at the point in time which discussion would close, you would go to a vote on the amendment.
okay.
If that prevails, then you have an amended main motion for further for consideration. If the motion to amend would fail, then you're back to your original motion as originally made.
Okay,
And-
so I would have to ask for the amended motion.
Right, the first vote is on the motion to amend, and
Okay.
strictly that.
Okay.
If it's useful, I think it would be accurate to describe the amendment as deleting section 3 from ordinance number 13-10702
Deleting section 3 and what else? I'm sorry.
from the ordinance that's under consideration.
And is that something I do or the person that amended it would want to do?
Well, I'm just trying to give you a
On.
more succinct description of
Right.
the
Yeah, what it
amendment
is,
and
yeah.
just try to reference it.
I apologize, I haven't read the ordinance. So, can you direct me then, Mike, to that, to your comment there?
I think the net effect is just
Second-
deleting section
second
3
page of the ordinance.
the ordinance.
At the top of the page, we've broken this out by legal description as to what lots would become C2, what lot would become R2, and what
Okay.
lots would become Plan C2. So at the top of the ordinance, Section 3, it indicates that Lot 27 of the Hazelwood addition would be downzoned to R2, and that is a standalone section of the ordinance. So what Mr. Scragg is saying is that one way to characterize the amended motion would be to delete Section 3 from the ordinance rezoning the property.
Okay. If it's proper, I'd be happy to amend my motion.
Well, or possibly I'll defer to legal counsel, but possibly to restate the motion
Okay.
with section 3 referencing the exclusion of lot 27.
Okay. Then I will, then I'll make a motion to
Restate your motion.
amend to delete section 3, which refers to lot 27 of the property description, or of the ordinance, and have it remain C1.
Second that motion.
You did say deleting section 3 from the ordinance?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to delete section 3 from the original ordinance on the amendment. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Motion carries on amended 3-2.
Then we come back to the first,
I
correct?
don't have to go to the original one since that was passed, correct?
No, you do then go back to the original motion as amended and discuss and vote on that main motion as amended.
Okay. Okay, so back to the original ordinance amended. I need somebody to motion that.
No,
Well,
we're ready to go.
You're in the
That-
position of having the motion and second now that the amendment passed, and so if there's further discussion or debate, you can have that.
Okay.
Once that's over, you can simply vote, call the vote.
Okay. Is there any further discussion or debate on that? Okay, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
Pro vote.
Well, you're actually,
Motion.
you're ready for the vote.
This is ready for the vote.
If discussion is
Okay.
over, you're
Okay,
ready
I've
for the vote.
never had one this complicated.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Well, it's,
Goodness, all right.
it is that.
It's like peeling an onion.
It really is.
It's the pressure of a former commissioner in the audience, former mayor.
I know, it really is.
Senator. Senator, yeah, yes.
No pressure. Okay, so I guess we will have to do the roll call then.
Not on this.
We're in first reading, so
Oh,
that's
first
Should be
reading,
okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all in favor, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought I already did that, right?
No.
Okay,
Madam Mayor,
so.
would it be helpful
You-
if I read?
Yes.
Yes,
read
please.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
that's-
I have so many notes on here now.
Okay, the motion is to pass ordinance number 10,702 with an amendment to exclude section 3, which excludes lot 27
Correct.
on first reading.
Okay, on first reading. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right. Onward and upward.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Over to administration.
Item 8.1, second reading of ordinance number 698, amending Chapter 25, Article 8, Section 25, 141 of the Salina Code pertaining to harassment by telecommunications device.
Ordinance number 13-10698 was passed on first reading on June 3rd, 2013. Since that time, no comments have been received. Was there any public comment on this particular ordinance? Okay, I would go ahead and entertain a motion to adopt on second reading.
Madam Mayor, I move that we adopt on second reading ordinance number 13-10698.
Second.
Okay, and there's no further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Do a roll call on that one.
Okay.
She's really flustered
Yes,
now.
second.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Commissioner Blanchard.
Aye.
Commissioner Crawford.
Aye.
Commissioner Hardy.
Aye.
Commissioner Householder.
Aye.
Mayor Shirley.
Aye.
Item 8.2, second reading or ordinance number 10,699, amending Chapter 5, Section 518 and 567 of the Salina Code to allow Sunday sales of alcoholic liquor and cereal malt beverage in original package and sale of alcoholic liquor on certain holidays in the original package.
Okay. Ordinance number 13-10699 was passed on first reading on June 3rd, 2013. Since then, no comments have been received. Do we have any comments from the public on this ordinance? Okay. All right. I know this one's going to be a roll call.
Yeah.
Well,
Ask
I-
Aye.
I move that we pass ordinance number 13-10699, amending Chapter 5, Sections 5-18 and 5-67 of the Salina Code to allow Sunday sales of alcoholic liquor and cereal malt beverage in the original package and sale of alcoholic liquor on certain holidays in the original package.
Second.
Madam Clerk, can I get a roll call on that?
Commissioner Blanchard.
aye.
Commissioner Crawford.
Aye.
Commissioner Hardy.
Aye.
Commissioner Householder.
Aye.
Mayor Shirley.
Aye.
Item 8.3, General Obligation Bond Notes and Bonds, Series 2013-1 and 2013-B. Sub-item 8.3A, Resolution Number 137010, authorizing the offering for public sale of general obligation temporary notes and bonds. Sub-item 8.3B, First Reading Ordinance Number 1010701, authorizing the issuance and delivery of general obligation bonds. Item 8.3, Resolution Number 137011, providing for adoption of an ambiguous continuing disclosure undertaking relating to the obligation issued and to be issued by the City of Salina.
Mr. Franz?
I've always wanted to use the word omnibus from the podium. This is our routine annual procedure of issuing our temporary notes and bonds for projects that are underway. Let's start with the omnibus continuing disclosure undertaking. We are required annually to file with Emma, who I can't describe to you what they mean, but it's essentially a municipal securities registration site, what they call a continuing disclosure, which includes basically filing our annual financial report as audited, along with a couple of other pieces of supplemental information. And the resolution simply provides a way to do that one time to cover all of our issues, so that we don't have to file a separate disclosure for each issue number. The resolution authorizing the notes, I should say the notes, are being issued to pay for the downtown lighting system at $3,150,000. And contrary to what it says in the blue sheet, those are not to be combined with KDOT money. That's freestanding. And then they also will pay for the Cloud and 9th intersection. The general obligation bonds will retire temporary note series 2012-1, as well as provide some supplemental funds for some additional projects. The projects so funded are the Magnolia Hills subdivision, a supplemental amount for Fire Station Number 1, the costs associated with East Magnolia Road, improvements to the Bicentennial Center. This is the first year of the capital improvement program. These are the projects that they intend to get done this year. And then finally, hopefully for the last time, a supplemental issue for the North Ohio grade separation project that is now finally complete with litigation pretty much settled. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Franz, is the North Ohio grade separation, was that a property settlement? What was that?
Those are costs that have been incurred since the last round of bond issues that we issued that were involved in continuing to settle the disputes over property acquisition, essentially, property acquisition and relocation. Does that answer your question?
That does. Thank
Okay.
you.
Any other questions for staff? Any questions from the public? And this will need 3 separate motions, correct?
That's correct.
See, I figured that one out pretty easy.
I move we approve resolution number 137010, authorizing the offering for public sale of general obligation temporary notes and bonds.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor on 137010? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That motion carries 5-0.
Keep on rolling, Kay.
It's
Commissioner Crawford. Yeah.
I move we approve on first reading ordinance number 13-10701, authorizing the issuance and delivery of general obligation bonds.
Second.
Okay, have a motion and a second on 13-10701. All those in favor?
Did I get a different blue sheet up here? Because I'm seeing 13-7011.
I think she's.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were skipping. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Just making sure here. Just making sure how dyslexic I was up here. That could be an issue in this position.
That motion comes 5-0. I'd entertain a motion on the third ordinance.
I move we approve resolution 13-77011, providing for the adoption of omnibus continuing disclosure undertaking relating to obligation issued and to be issued by the city of Salina.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? And that third motion carries.
Threw me off. I know, yeah.
It's different.
That was a
I
mouthful.
know.
That was a mouthful there.
I was sitting there just looking at that thing going, man, am I reading this wrong? What's going on here?
Item 8.4, first reading ordinance number 1010700, amending Chapter 14, Article 3, Division 2 of the Salina Code by amending Section 14-57.4 and adding Section 14-57.7.1, prohibiting the sale and discharge of sky lanterns, and granting the city manager or their designee the authority to prohibit additional fireworks deemed to be present an unexpected, uncontrolled risk to persons or property.
Mr. Tragg?
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. As you may be aware, this fireworks season will be our third year that fireworks have been legal in Salina. And last year, Sky Lanterns represented a new product that was being sold that frankly caught us a little bit by surprise in terms of their availability and what they might represent in terms of a fire or safety risk. And we felt like they were a little bit different than other fireworks. Admittedly, fireworks are inherently a little unpredictable and explosive and flammable in nature, but we felt like sky lanterns represent something different than typical fireworks in that when you discharge a typical firework, you have an expectation that you can send it in a certain direction, it'll explode quickly and disseminate, and you have some control over the property that might be impacted. As we noted in the blue sheet, sky lanterns we think are a little bit unique in that you're unable to direct its flight. Once you launch it, you can't point it in a certain direction. It has an unpredictable flight pattern, It's unpredictable in terms of its duration, how long it flies and where it'll land. It has a direct flame source that stays lit over a prolonged period of time as it's drifting, and then it has more likelihood to get caught in trees or other flammable vegetation or materials, either in flight or wherever it ultimately lands. And so we're not the only community that recognized this as an issue. I know Wichita took kind of prompt action last year, right around the 4th of July, and other communities have since amended their codes to address sky lanterns. And while we were considering that, we thought, there's also the possibility that some other unforeseen item might come along. And so the amendment that's been prepared for your consideration specifically defines and prohibits sky lanterns and creates some criteria by which the city manager or their designee could apply those criteria to other possible products rather than having to amend the ordinance on the fly as something might be identified. So what we tried to do is identify some criteria that could be applied, and those criteria were, as the background summary stated, items that are deemed by the city manager to present an unexpected or uncontrolled risk to persons or property, recognizing that fireworks in and of themselves have some expected properties to them, but certain items may be unacceptably unpredictable. So the ordinance that's been prepared for your consideration creates a definition of a sky lantern, further clarifies what are approved consumer fireworks by creating the exceptions of items that are prohibited by law, specifically calling out sky lanterns, and then creating the criteria by which the city manager could deem other products as being prohibited. The options that we identified for your consideration were to approve the ordinance as proposed, to amend the ordinance as you may see fit, to postpone consideration of the ordinance to a specified date and provide staff additional direction in terms of additional information that you might want, or you could vote to deny the ordinance, ultimately leaving sky lanterns as a permissible fireworks product to be sold and discharged in the community. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a question. As I was reading this thing, I was wondering if it would make more sense to just simplify this ordinance by not referring to any specific type of product, and just go with the second part where you're granting the city manager or their designee the authority to prohibit fireworks deemed to present an unexpected or uncontrolled risk to person or property.
Right. That certainly is an option. In the event that the city manager were to make that declaration, I think there would be an expectation that we would formalize that determination in the reasoning. By leaving the sky lantern specifically prohibited, it just clearly calls that one out as something that the commission's deliberated on and has determined. But either way, it would be acceptable.
I just see as a single product. There will be another single product next year or the following year. So why not just have a blanket statement that refers to everyone or everything?
I can't argue with that logic. I understand your point.
I think though, since we know that this one has been an issue, it maybe is more of a public awareness is probably more of the issue, so much as that. And I definitely understand where you're trying to shorten it up, but I think it is because we want people to know up front, hey, next year this isn't going to be sellable, rather than have to have you allow it, then pass, then use your authority. And so it makes sense to go ahead and include it at this point in my mind.
So we shouldn't have an amendment that would get us all flustered.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to add bat bombs to this, but yes.
To the benefit of your flexibility, either way would be fine from my perspective.
Yeah. Let's just keep it simple. Yeah.
Do we have any since you're going to be taking on an added role here as determining what meets some of this criteria or not, is there a standard, industry standard that you're able to refer to so that it's not so much you've got to become a fireworks expert?
Right. Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I don't see this coming up very often. We have typically go with those fireworks allowed by state law. This would be, I believe, the only exception at this time.
Mm-hmm.
I see it being rare. I see if there's something newly developed, possibly, or if by chance maybe there's good research on a piece that no one thought about before, and it showed by far it creates just loads and loads of injuries or something. But honestly, don't see us going back to it, and I would rely on the research and recommendation of the fire department to first take a look at it. So I think we can make it work however you'd like to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just thinking forward, I just wouldn't want to have either one of you be in the position where, and I guess maybe I'll put it in the form of a question, is there any sort of appeal process that when you make a determination that if someone's selling it and they want to argue with you about, well, I should be allowed to sell this, is there any?
The ordinance in and of itself doesn't include an appeal process, but I think I'll defer to Greg, but I would think that with anything in which you delegate any authority to me, if someone wants to appeal it in some form, they could bring that to you. I'm not sure what process in this case they would do that, whether it be the specific question or whether it should be on a list or not, but I defer that question to Greg, but I think it's possible.
Mr. Gage is correct. Your instincts are correct in the first instance in that the delegation of authority to a staff member, the enforceability of that is dependent upon the extent to which you provide directive criteria by which that determination would be made, and that's what prompts that additional language in the proposed draft. If Mr. Gage were to make a determination, any aggrieved person, I believe, would be entitled to bring that to you in the form of an appeal, and it would then be up to you to determine. So that is, I think, the way that would transpire.
And then the only other question I had in reading through this is some of these vendors might purchase a whole bunch of a certain item and then after the fact find out that they're not able to sell those here. Is there any sort of timing that you anticipate, say, 30 days prior to somebody being able to set up a stand?
Yeah, I would say at least that. Quite honestly, I would like for this to be part of a debriefing after each 4th of July holiday, so that if there is a decision at some point that there's another item added to the list that's not allowed in future years, that we do that well in advance. So yeah, I agree with you. I think when you look at how that industry works, timing is a huge issue when they look at purchasing fireworks and the tents and deliveries and setups and opening day and all that. So we definitely wouldn't want to hamper that. And at this point, I'm not aware of any others that are on the list to be looked at. So when you have something like this, there's always a concern that, I'm sure there's a couple on the list and they're ready to look at those. There aren't that I'm aware of. So I think we're good for next year with the Sky Lanterns being really the sole focus.
Any other questions or comments for staff?
I'll make a comment to Commissioner Hardy's initial question on that. I'd be curious to know if you guys have any comment on whether you see that maybe Sky Lanterns, the reference to that is maybe pulled out later, or is it just now for kind of general information purposes that we're...
Well, I think one of the intentions would be, much as you just asked what the appeal process would be, this is a way to communicate this wasn't a staff-level decision. I mean, the City Commission's already deliberated on that issue. So if it were left in the ordinance, staff would be in a little bit better position to say they intentionally thought this particular product through and made a very deliberate decision, where if we took it off, said it was a city manager's determination, that leaves open the possibility of appeal back to you on that particular item.
But he would be taking the heat then, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, yeah.
And he doesn't get a pay increase to be the fireworks dictator.
Well,
yeah.
I don't mind it either way. One could
Right.
presume staff didn't think I would take Sky Lanterns off the list, so let's get it out there. I'm just kidding about that. But it truly doesn't matter to me. Either way is fine.
It's really safety. I like the fact that this is pretty obvious. It would seem to me a fire hazard, and I like that we include it in there just to let everybody know early and often that, hey, we don't allow these. I mean, it's kind of a neat concept. It kind of probably looks pretty. I never heard of them until now.
They're great.
I could see where just an open flame floating around is
Yeah.
probably not a good idea in a dry Kansas wheat field. It seems a little counterproductive.
It's neat till it lands on your roof.
Exactly. Yeah.
So no other questions for staff? No public comment? Okay, with no public comment, no more questions from staff, I'd entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I'd move that we pass ordinance number 13-10700 on first reading, amending Chapter 14, Article 3, Division 2 of the Salina Code by amending sections 14-57.4 and adding sections 14-57.7.1, prohibiting the sale and discharge of sky lanterns, and granting the city manager or their designee the authority to prohibit additional fireworks deemed to present an unexpected or uncontrolled risk to persons or property.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0.
Item 8.5, award of contract for the 2013 concrete pavement rehabilitation, project number 122953.
Mr. Stack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Commissioners. This is our annual concrete rehab project. We did have good bids. It's 2 bidders, and the engineer's estimate was close this time, right in the middle, which is a good thing. And we seem to think they're good bids. They're in line with what we've seen so far this year, and very competitive. So this project is actually mostly on Belmont. There's a small section on Republic that's really bad, so we're going to get that this year. Both of them are near, Republic's near a railroad, as well as Belmont and Magnolia near the railroads. There's some coordination and some extra insurance they have to get for that, those 2 projects, which does adds a little element of coordination. But other than that, we feel like it's should be done by the end of the year, and good bidder. Pavers successfully completed our last concrete rehab project along Belmont in this same area. We're basically just adding on to that and continuing around the corner, all from about Heartland to Allen Street. It'd be southbound. And then they also completed the Crawford and Ohio intersection improvements last year on a compressed schedule and did a really good job. So they understand the significance of Magnolia and Belmont intersection being a pretty, it's a busy intersection and has a school and a mall and railroads, and so it's a little bit complex but they're clearly a good contractor and have done a good job for us in the past. So the project came in around the budget. Let's see, we have $594,000 in our budget. The overage of $4,000 we feel like can be paid from other sub-CIP projects. We've had some savings on the crack sealing project, and we have a few more to bid this year, so we feel like we can make up for that. Probably won't get to do 2 railroad crossings this year based on the railroad getting back to us, so we may have some extra money there but either way we should be able to cover the $4,000 as well as a little bit of contingency. These projects historically, once you open up the concrete, I mean, we core it, we add in an element of base repair that's necessary, but you just never know what you're going to find. So that's why we ask for 5% instead of 2 or 3. 5% seems to be. We hope that should cover us. So I'd entertain questions.
On a concrete project like this, what's the lifespan on something like that? How long before you have to repair it again?
We hope 30 to 40 years, and that's conservative.
Right, and a lot of that depends on weather, doesn't it?
Well, weather, yeah. I mean, concrete gets hard all the time. It gets really hard for a while, and then it gets hard exponentially over time. Salts do have a decaying aspect to it, but if it's hard enough and sealed enough and put in the right moisture and the right air and all those things, it seems to work really well in Salina. I mean, definitely the surface does some decay over time with salts and environmental exposure, but structurally it does pretty well around here. So we hope that this is a 30 to 40 year fix for Belmont.
Okay.
It's been around about a little bit longer than that, I guess. There. Commissioners,
I think Dan would agree. The secret to concrete streets is base preparation, good quality concrete, which we've not had issues with, and as you mentioned, crack sealing, keeping the water out of the cracks.
Right.
Does it work better on the heaving issues better than the pavement and stuff that we've used? I mean, does the concrete suffer from the same risks that the asphalt does as well?
It's different risks. Asphalt breaks and shrinks and swells. Concrete does the same thing, but it's panel, and so you just don't see it as much, I guess. Mm-hmm. The panels move and contract a little bit over time, and sometimes when it gets really hot, you see them blow up, so that does happen as they get what is it, Markley? Markley's a good example of that. Every year we struggle with that. Really good pavement, really quality, thick pavement, but over time, as those joints increase and decrease, they just they get so they don't work very well anymore. And so that's the main issue we have with it, really.
And my limited knowledge of road construction, now I know just at one time they talked about that you mentioned this base, there's like a lime or something, I mean, there's some sort of base that's put down that cuts back on a lot of the heaving. In the past, have we not done that? I say this, I mean, a little for my own education, but I know streets, as Commissioner Crawford will point out, it's a big issue with Salina, and people might be interested to know that Kansas and I think a couple other places in the country have a lot more issue on this than other places. We're kind of unique in the fact that we have this heaving or what. Is this something we're now doing pretty much under all our new projects, or is it as budget allows? I mean, it seems to me like you'd want to put this base every time down.
Yeah, for city projects, we either have lime, fly ash, or some kind of a base rock that we put down. So that's pretty common on our projects. Arterials, collectors, that would be a definite, we would do that. Residential streets are a little more, you know, they don't have the same traffic load. So it's arguable whether you can get by without it. It's better with it, no question about it. However, our developers and property owners, and you know, are they willing to pay that has been a balancing act for many years. A lot of cities struggle with that.
Is that a function of the soil conditions mostly? So
Right.
a lot of clay soils and a lot of.
That's correct.
Yeah. A question I had on this is the southbound lanes, correct?
Correct.
Okay, because I drove out there today and I noticed that there's kind of a break there right before Heartland and as it goes.
Yes.
Do those include are those going to include the intersections, or do those, or the crossing points, or do those are going to take place at, I assume, when the north side?
We haven't dealt with the crossings yet. I don't know how bad they are as far as we know. The travel lanes are the things you see mostly. So and the crossings are turning, slow movement. They're not as big of an issue, but that could be something we deal with once we start going south.
Okay.
So we've just really focused on the main travel lanes so far.
I just noticed the one on Heartland because I frequently
So that's not a good one.
travel that one. There's a break in there with sort of an asphalt gap.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah,
in
that's
that.
pulled apart, shrunk and swelled over the years.
And then, is there any special things that are going to take place, being the fire station being located right there?
Well, we've had to work with, we just basically have to work with them to make sure we, I guess, notify them and balance out when we do what. So we've had to, last project it did on Marymount, we had to coordinate with them pretty closely, and we will have to again here as well. So it's you know, sometimes we can do things and work around and make sure we just take their interests into account. But let's see, we are going to be in that area, so we'll just have to try to figure out the best thing to do is there.
Will Republic be closed for construction?
That's an interesting one because it's fairly narrow, so we'll do one side at a time. So our thinking is on that, we'll close basically one side at a time, so you'll have one-way traffic for the commuters, and then the access to the residents there will still be allowed. You'll still be able to get into your property, but it will be basically half at a time, so it'll be a little bit challenged. One day you'll be able to go one way, and then once we switch over, you'll be able to go the other way, but not both during the project.
Any other questions for Mr. Stack? Any public comment?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stack. No more questions, and I see no comments. I'd go ahead and entertain a motion.
I move that we award the contract for project number 13-2953, 2013 concrete pavement rehabilitation to Pavers, Inc. of Salina in the amount of $598,530.82 with a 5% construction contingency, or $29,926.54.
Second.
Have a motion and a double second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Madam Mayor, at this time I move to recess into executive session for 30 minutes to discuss with legal counsel matters subject to the attorney-client privilege for the reason that public discussion of those matters would waive the privilege and adversely affect the city's interest in the matters, and reconvene at 5:45 p.m.
Have our motion for executive session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We're now in executive session.
Family of Trayvon Martin